It's a requirement.
Well, I wanted to introduce to you Ann McDermott, who is the Associate Executive Director at Carroll Lutheran Village. She will be presenting today our seminar, Dementia and Caregiving. My name is Stacy Brady. I am the, I serve in two roles. I serve as the chaplain at the Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant, the sister community to Carroll Lutheran Village, which is in Ellicott City. But I also serve the parent organization, Lutheran Social Ministries of Maryland, as the Director of Church Relations. And so right now, Lutheran Social Ministries of Maryland is running a series of seminars to the congregations in the Delaware, Maryland Synod to reach out and to hopefully share our resources with congregations that are interested in learning about things that we hope we have some expertise in as we care for aging adults. And Ann is going to bring, like I said, a seminar to you today on dementia and caregiving. So she has lots of experience and is certified as an instructor in this role. And this is a wonderful presentation. I know you'll gain lots of insight and there'll be plenty of time for question and answer. So I'm gonna turn it over to Ann.
All right, okay, thanks Stacy. As Stacy said, I'm Ann McDermott, and I already know some of you here. Yes, I am a certified dementia practitioner, but more importantly, I ran a dementia-specific facility for almost 15 years, an assisted living facility. So I have experienced a lot of different kinds of dementia. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so it's my firsthand understanding and experience with the disease that kind of makes me a little bit more of an expert on it. David, want to go to the next one? Okay, I know it's kind of hard for you to see, so I'm going to go ahead and talk anyway. A lot of people come up to me, especially my relatives, my cousins, saying it's like, oh my God, I think I have dementia. No, you don't have dementia. And so I'm going to run into some examples, give you some examples for getting a name. The other day, I couldn't remember Trisha Yearwood, okay? And she was, because I was going to watch her show, you know, on TV. She was, you know, so I was talking to my brother. My brother is living with me now. And I said, you know, that singer, that country singer, doesn't help, he doesn't know country music, okay? So that was kind of a non-starter. I said, you know, she's married to Garth Brooks, okay? Still dead in the water, he doesn't understand. Okay, you know, she lives in Nashville and she helped a lot after the tornado and she's won Grammys. Blah, 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 blah. And it's only when I got to the cooking show, I was able to connect with it, you know? And so anyway, so forgetting a name is not unusual. And if you notice when I talked about it right now, do you know how my brain tried to solve the problem? Right. By thinking of other things. So that's my brain working to try to get that information some other way. Bottom line is I can always just get on my phone, my smartphone, and find out the information too. But I thought I would use my brother. But that's not a person with dementia. That just means your brain is on overload right now. And how could we not be? We all have our smartphones, we've got our TV on, the dogs are barking, the kids are playing, all of that kind of thing. And that makes us kind of hardwired and we're always on. The brain is always on. So that's a function of brain overload. That's not a function of dementia. When you cannot remember, and this is classic dementia, when you have difficulty remembering the names, not of your children, but possibly your in-laws. Who did my son marry? Her name, okay, or their children. It's not unusual for dementia residents to forget their grandchildren. How many grandchildren they have, what are the names of their grandchildren. So if you see that happening and on a regular basis, it may be cause for concern. Let's say leaving a pot on the stove. I always leave pots on the stove. I burn through pots. When I'm doing beets, if I'm cooking, you know, in the fall and I want that cinnamon flavor throughout the house, you know, that's not dementia. Dementia is basically well, I'll give you an example. My mother was Polish, so she made pierogies all the time. If my mother could not remember the recipe to do pierogies, there's a problem. So it's when you lose something, that knowledge base of something that you had for many years. Finding the right word, okay, saying hairbrush versus toothbrush, not a big deal. Saying Hawaii instead of toothbrush is a big deal. When you take something that is totally inappropriate, and that's kind of a signal. Forgetting the day and time. Next week we have Memorial Day. I'm telling you, that will screw me up for the rest of the work week, you know, because I'm always thinking instead of Tuesday, it's Monday, you know, whenever you get a day off. And God forbid when you have Christmas in the middle of the week, that really screws me up in terms of day and time. That's not dementia. It's basically is a person, like if they can't remember how to get home. And I think you've heard of situations like that, where all of a sudden they'll be driving and they can't remember where they are. They get confused, disoriented. That's a signal that there could be a problem. Misplacing keys, everybody loses their keys, everybody. It's if you forget how to use your key, okay, or what the key is for, then you might have some indication. And finally, feeling blue or sad in a situation. I'm a sucker. If you watch, I watch Hallmark movies, okay, and they always, especially at the holidays, they kind of make you feel blue and sad, but that's appropriate. That's what they're trying to evoke. With a person with dementia, they'll have emotions that don't really fit the situation. So they may cry at something inappropriate or laugh when something is a little bit sad. So it's that kind of unusual behavior that you have to kind of spot. David, just continue. Okay, so we talked a little bit about warning signs. We talked about memory loss. When I'm talking about short-term memory loss, what is short-term memory loss? You can remember when you went to college, you can remember what your degree is in, but you can't remember if you had breakfast this morning. Okay, short-term memory loss. We talked of difficulty performing a task. What am I talking about here? One of the classic signs when people would call in and say, I think that my loved one has dementia, let's say if they're getting dressed. So what does that mean, getting dressed? Those are daily tasks. They're usually called activities of daily living: dressing, grooming, bathing, toileting. So what would be unusual that would be a little bit of a trigger or warning sign? If somebody was putting on multiple pairs of pants or underwear, or putting on 2 or 3 shirts, or going into the dirty clothes hamper and getting dirty clothes and then wearing them. That might be a sign of something, you know, adverse. We talked about mood and personality change a little bit, but one thing with dementia people, they tend to become much more withdrawn, confused, paranoid, think maybe people are stealing from them. Okay, so it's that kind of a personality change. Impaired judgment. Impaired judgment is to look outside and say, oh my God, it looks like a beautiful day, and forget that the temperature is 100 degrees. Or look at the sun outside, oh my God, it's a beautiful day, and it's 30 wind chill below 0. So they have impaired judgment. Disorientation. See if this rings a bell with some of you. Is, let's say your loved one gets up in the middle of the night and starts getting dressed and is fighting with you to say, I want to go to church. It's time to go to church, even though it's 3 o'clock in the middle of the night. Okay. So it's that kind of disorientation. Or disorientation, another example would be, let's say if it's summertime and they put on a heavy winter sweater, okay, that they're dressing for winter. So those are the kinds of clues and indications. Problems with language. It's not just choosing an inappropriate word. They basically may be speaking and it doesn't make sense. It's not a rational thought process. In fact, they may start a sentence and never complete it. Okay, so these are warning signs that something could be wrong. But let's go to the next slide. But you know what I want you to do is go to the doctor, because there might be other reasons why there is confusion. The term is sometimes called delirium, but you might have other things that might be causing delirium, and that could be medications. You know, a lot of people are on multiple medications at the same, or multiple medications, and they could be having an adverse effect mixing all these drugs together. Or let's say you're on pain medication or sleep medication. That could throw you off and kind of create a state of confusion. Dehydration, malnutrition. Okay, it doesn't take long to be dehydrated in weather like this. Okay, you know, somebody said to me, you are always, we meaning everyone is in a constant state of dehydration, always. So you always need to be drinking. And if you're thirsty, that means you start getting into the serious dehydration. So a lot of people, the same thing with eating. If an elderly person is living alone, especially, they're probably not eating or drinking enough. You know, I used to see this a lot where I worked. It was in kind of the Bethesda area. And so you had these kids that are, you know, major money makers. They would come and visit their parents, and they were very good coming every day. Mom, are you okay? Do I need to get something? They see their parent watching Wheel of Fortune. And no, I'm okay, I'm fine, don't worry, everything was fine today. Okay, but they really are watching to see what their parent is eating and drinking. And so that becomes an issue, okay? So that can fool you if you're massively dehydrated to thinking that you have dementia, you really don't. Depression is not the same thing as dementia. Why would an elderly person be depressed? Well, chances are maybe they're losing their keys, their ability to drive. Maybe they've had to move from the home that they've lived in for 50 years. Better yet, maybe you had a spouse who died and you were married to them for 60 years. Well, there's plenty of reasons to be depressed. That is not the same thing as dementia. Infections. Somebody can have a long-standing urinary tract infection, and that can cause people to think, ooh, there's something wrong with mom or dad, and it may not be the case at all. It could be a UTI, it could be some sort of respiratory or even pneumonia. You know, pneumonia, you don't have to be running a super temperature. You don't have to be coughing a lot to have kind of, especially this time of year, a walking pneumonia situation. The bottom line is this. It is not good enough for you to think that your loved one or a relative has dementia. You really need to go get it checked out. Okay, a physician needs to give you a diagnosis of dementia. Okay, because he's going to rule out all these other conditions, these physiological and mental conditions that might give you a sense that you've got, you know, your loved one may have dementia, but you really, really don't. And if you can treat that, chances are, you're able to function quite well. Any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
What is it about a UTI that causes that?
Well, it's any kind of infection because it's the body trying to cause.
But the UTI is pretty common.
Well, a UTI is common among why? Because elderly people tend to sit a lot, and because they're dehydrated. Okay, so that urine is much more concentrated.
But that causes confusion. I just never.
Oh, any kind of infection could cause a confusion.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, why is there a prevalence of UTIs with the elderly? Because we sit too much and we are going to the bathroom enough, and we're not going to the bathroom enough because we're not drinking enough. Okay, it all kind of rolls together. Okay, next. Okay, so what we're going to talk about a little bit, and I think this will be the most informative part. A lot of people think Alzheimer's is the same thing as dementia. It is not. It is the most common type of dementia, but it is not everything. So if you were to have a pie, 2/3 of that pie is Alzheimer's. So it is by far the most common kind of dementia that we have, but that there are multiple other kinds. In fact, there are over 100 different kinds of dementia. That's why when they talk about a treatment to solve dementia, that's not going to happen. It's way too complicated than that. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, people can have multiple dementias at the same time. And so it's not unusual, for example, for you to have Lewy body with Parkinson's. Okay, they kind of tend to go hand in hand. So, and you can have early onset Alzheimer's along with frontal temporal dementia. So it's much more complicated. And the reason why you want to have, and I don't want to say this in an odd way, but if you're going to have dementia, it's best to be in this area of the country because you've got the best diagnosticians at Hopkins, at GW, at Georgetown. There is expertise, some of the best in the country. You want to know what kind of dementia you have because it will affect the course of treatment. It will determine what kinds of medications are used. but also in terms of, let's say, if you happen to have your loved one in an assisted living center, it will determine where that loved one, where are they going to be placed close to the nursing center, or should they be by themselves? A lot of that is dictated by the kind of dementia that you have. So we're going to just take a few minutes just to talk about those. Like I said, Alzheimer's is the most common type. And we've already talked, it's typified by short-term memory loss. That's because it starts, it's called the hippocampus, that part of the brain, and it just goes throughout the whole brain. See, you got Alzheimer's right on the side. So short-term memory is what's impacted first. So that kind of typifies Alzheimer's, but that isn't the case with other kinds of dementia. We've talked about judgment is impaired. We've talked about memory loss of the short term. Decision-making. When I used to train my caregivers, I never said to them, you want to make it simple for a dementia resident because things tend to get overwhelmed for them. So you always want to make things of a yes-no nature. So you don't say, hey, what do you want to wear today? You say, do you want to wear the black pants or the brown pants? Do you want the green sweater or the yellow sweater? Do you want eggs for breakfast or would you prefer sausage? Do you want pancakes or do you want French toast? You make it simple, choices, because it's too overwhelming for them just to try to have these open-ended questions. So that's best for caregiving. What Alzheimer's is caused by is plaques and tangles. And the reason I want to talk to you a little bit about it is because they do have some new research and testing underway. I'll get to that in a minute. But what happens with Alzheimer's disease is the body produces, it's called an amyloid. It's a buildup of amyloid enzyme, and you've also got the tau enzyme, and that causes, one causes the plaque and the other causes the tangles. The amyloid is the plaque buildup. So let's say you've got a brain cell. Let's say it's a circle. Around that is the plaque develops, okay, because it's that buildup of the amyloid enzyme. Now what happens? What happens when you have teeth and you have a buildup of plaque around your teeth? What happens? It gets infected, and what else? Then it dies if they don't remove it, okay? So that's what happens with that neuron. You've got a buildup of plaque, and it basically smothers that neuron, okay? It's not allowed to get any kind of oxygen or blood flow. And so that neuron cell dies. And what are the tangles? It's the buildup of all those dead cells, okay? So what's happening, those brain cells are dying, and then, as those, they aren't able to regenerate, they don't recover. Now, there's a study underway that supposedly is going to be able to deal with that plaque, which would be great, because right now they don't have anything to get rid of the plaque or that tangle. In other words, you hear on TV, you hear about, certain medications, Namenda, those kinds of medications. I'm spacing on it right now, the most common one. But I'm just saying is the medications that are out there, Exelon patch, they can slow down the process. But right now there is nothing out there to get rid of those plaques or tangles. So if this is showing promise, good for them, because that's the first step. What you want to do is be able to get rid of that plaque without destroying that brain cell. Because once it's gone, it's gone. What's really frightening, when a person passes away from Alzheimer's, and that could be a 10 to 20 year process, 10 to 20 years. When they die from Alzheimer's, well, if they die from Alzheimer's, that size of the brain is the size of a baby's brain. So that's how much the disease just destroys. It literally eats the brain. It literally eats the brain away. And so a fully functioning person will have the brain capacity of a baby at the time that they die. Luckily, people with Alzheimer's tend to die from other things first. Like if they've got a comorbidity, like say, COPD, heart failure, something like that, and good for them that journey ends at that point. I didn't have too many people die from end-stage Alzheimer's, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you do. The next, and by the way, stop me if you have any other questions, okay? Just go ahead and stop me. I'm happy to take anything. The next common one that you have is called go ahead.
So question, if they can stop the plaque and the tangles,
yeah,
will the brain regenerate itself?
it won't regenerate, but it'll keep, it'll keep it, yeah, at least at this point. I don't, that's a good question. I'm not sure. If the plaque is removed, the cell isn't destroyed. So you're going to be able to. But the medications right now out there, all they could do is Aricept. God, that was what I was spacing on. Aricept and Amenda Exelon patch. All they could do is slow down the process. They don't get rid of the plaques or tangles. Okay, so great if we could have something that would finally address that issue. Because slowing down the process doesn't cure it. It just extends it, the process. Okay, vascular is caused when you have a heart attack or a stroke. Now remember what I said with Alzheimer's, you have it starting in the hippocampus and going around the brain. Well, what happens with a stroke and heart attacks, it's just going to hit pockets of the brain. So it's going to mean that memory is going to be impaired, but it's not going to be totally impaired. So when I would have people with vascular dementia in my building, when I was an executive director, they did retain some memory. They could remember my name sometimes. They could remember what my role was. Now, why does that present an issue? Somebody figure that out. Why would I be worried about a vascular resident?
Because they could seem fine 1 minute and then they're really not.
What?
They could seem fine.
Whoops, that's interesting. But anyway, go ahead.
I
think you have the answer. I think
right, so they would appear normal.
That's absolutely it. You're really, yeah, because I'm telling you, I have staff who have worked with me for 5 or 6 years who just couldn't answer that question just like you did, because they can present normally. What's a problem? That would seem to be a good idea if they presented normally. Why is that a problem for me as an executive director?
Well, because you may give them more freedom and then they wound up hurt themselves.
Well, they're going to hurt themselves, but I go a quicker response. But you're in the right vein. Usually, dementia-specific facilities are secure. They're gated and they're locked. They're going to get out. Because guess what? If you present normally, then what does that mean? Or you present normally some of the time, what does that mean?
Some of the time you aren't normal.
Well, no. But if that means you're going to be able to trick people and get out of the building. Right. So if you have other people visiting their loved ones, and let's say they don't have, an understanding, a big understanding of dementia, there's a good chance you're going to be able to con them or fool them. And actually, that's what happened with one of my residents. I'll get it cleaned up later, Charlie. Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. I had a resident with vascular dementia, and she told a family member that she was visiting some of her friends, which is correct. She had friends in the building, and she walked out with them, right across the street, got on a bus, because in Montgomery County, you don't have to pay for a bus if you're elderly. They will give you free rides. So she went right on the bus, okay? She went to Silver Spring, and I was in Bethesda, and got off the bus and went into a CVS. Now, what's great about Montgomery County, we kind of determined within 20 minutes that she wasn't on the premises. We did a quick scan of the neighborhood. But they've got a dedicated unit in Montgomery County Police. And by God, they put out an all points bulletin. And you know what? We called the police at 20 to 1. And by 10 after 2, she was found. And she was back in the building. And if you have any sense, Bethesda isn't that close to Silver Spring. So look at how fast that they were able to determine that. I'm not sure they've got that in Carroll County, that ability. But it's basically like the business community is honed in very fast. So when that alert comes over, it's sort of like in Montgomery County, it's kind of like an enhanced silver alert. But they give a picture of the resident, which we had, just a total descriptive. And so, yep, she walked right from the bus into CVS. Good for us. She was actually looking for cigarettes, okay? So that's what her daughter said. But that's the whole thing with the vascular resident. They can fool you. They can fool you into thinking that they're normal. And so they present an enormous wandering risk. And by the way, when you say a wandering, the term is often elopement. So it's a term that a lot of people don't know. It's not married. It has nothing to do with that. Alopa means getting out of the building, okay? Okay, let's talk about frontal temporal dementia. Frontal temporal dementia is what it says. It's the frontal part of the brain and this part of the brain. Front is behaviors. It's your personality. But it also is sort of, what do I want to say? It's how you deal with the world, like the mores, how to function in a civilized society. Temporal is more language and speech. Now, when I had somebody with frontal temporal dementia, I could easily handle somebody with a speech issue. And let me show you how that plays out. Frontal temporal, and also, just so you know, frontal temporal, it impacts a different portion of the population. It's people more in their 40s and 50s, okay? And it's not, usually with Alzheimer's, it's usually 60s and 70s, okay? But frontal temporal, and even vascular, unless it's really unusual, it's gonna be 60s, 70s, 80s, in that range. Frontal temporal, it starts usually in your mid to late 40s, if not a little earlier. And a lot of times, you know, remember I just said that Alzheimer's is 20 years? Well, with frontal temporal, it goes really quickly, like 6 to 8 years, maybe 8 or 9 years. So oftentimes that resident passes away before they're 60 years old, or maybe in their early 60s, okay? So anyway, frontal temporal dementia is, if it's the temporal portion, the language, speech, what happens is these people are not going to speak very much, okay? They're not going to, they lose they can understand what you're saying, but they don't have great speech. They're going to be very quiet. In fact, they're not going to show any emotion. It's called, the terminology is like a flat affect, okay? No emotion. So I had a couple of residents like this, Dolores and Zandra, and they would walk around all the time, just like kind of aimlessly walking around, but just constant to the point where it was several miles a day they were walking around the building. Okay, and it was a big area. You could go in and out of all the wings, so it was built for that purpose. They didn't laugh, they didn't smile. It's called a flat affect. There's no emotions. Okay, but they can kind of understand what you're saying to them. So it's not like you couldn't communicate. It's not like they couldn't understand basic information, but they weren't really speaking, and they weren't showing much emotion at all. So, but that doesn't present a problem. The problem is the frontal part. If a person has the frontal temporal, but it's the behaviors. Why is that? Okay, I just said that people are in their 40s, 50s, maybe. So let's say you have a gentleman that's in his 50s, and it's behaviors. What do I mean by behaviors? This is the kind where it's called it's kind of like a spontaneous aggression. If you're caregiving, or if you know somebody who has done it in the past, a caregiver can usually sense if they're good when somebody's getting irritated with them. And what do? They back out. They back up and allow that person to cool off for a while. With frontal temporal dementia, you never see that anger just erupts. It just erupts, and you don't see it coming. I had it done to me once, to the point where I thought the guy was going to break my arm. He held it so tight and twisted it. But I also was accompanied a nurse just walking a resident down, and he was an admiral, just a really nice guy. But anyway, out of the blue, he just hit her in the face. And there was nothing to provoke it. You didn't see it coming. Literally, you did not see it coming. A total black eye, you know, because he was a strong, big gentleman. And so anyway, it's this spontaneous aggression that you have to worry. And why did I have to worry about that? I just talked about me. You have to worry about, are they going to impact one of my residents? Yeah. It's one thing that it's impacting my staff. It's another thing if it's impacting residents. I had a resident once who had frontal temporal, and he had been with us less than 2 weeks. And within 1 hour, he went down one wing, knocked over one resident, pushed her, pushed a second woman okay, down within 1 hour. And by noontime, he was out of my building because he presented an imminent risk. The problem is this, with frontal temporal, we may not always be able to care for them because that violent streak. Now, just so you know, this is where they start having medications like you hear about on TV. Zyprexa, Seroquel. Seroquel is the big one. And, you know, I know on TV it's projected as like, oh, it's an antipsychotic. So you've got Depakote, you've got, well, those are the main ones, Zyprexa and Depakote and Seroquel. And sometimes they're used together, sometimes they're used separately, but you've got to be able to manage that violence. You've got to tone it down. These are the residents who are likely to kick a staff member, hit significantly, not push or shove, bite. And believe it or not, I've had at least 1 or 2 incidents a year of a resident biting staff or biting another resident. And so anyway, so this is that spontaneous aggression. So I always have to be very careful about whether I thought we could manage that. And you know what? I had 64 beds. I'm telling you, a resident that has frontal temporal, that violent aggressive, he can change, he or she, but he especially can change the whole tenure of that building because staff is always on the lookout. You know, is he disagreeing with anybody? Is, you know, so it's, you know, and thank God I was set in a way which you did have staff being able to monitor, but it does present challenges, frontal temporal. You're not always able to take care of them, okay? Parkinson's is just like what you would think with Parkinson's. A lot of times they'll call it Parkinson's with dementia or dementia with Parkinson's. Same thing, pretty much same thing. Is basically you cannot keep this resident from falling. I've had wonderful residents that would literally, you know, we would get them a bed low to the ground, and we would put the mattress there, or not a mattress, a mat, so that they rolled out onto the floor. We would get physical therapy. We would get them to have a wheelchair or a walker. We'd have private duties in certain times of the day. You cannot keep that resident from falling. That rigidity is such that it's just the nature of it. I will talk about it because it was this tragic one. And again, he was relatively young. He was an engineer and he fell 6 times in 1 month. Now, there was only one time where he got hurt, but you know, I could not keep him safe. The son was desperate, and I mean desperate, not to have his dad, who was in his late 50s, early 60s, go to a nursing home. You know, but I couldn't keep him safe. I could not keep him safe. I could not keep him from falling. You know, sometimes you try to work with families to the extent you can because you try to empathize with them. And we would bring in private duty aides, but even that aide couldn't keep them from falling. You know what I mean? That aide went to go to the bathroom for 2 minutes and that's when the resident fell. Or I've seen it where the resident will literally fall right in front of the private duty and there was nothing they could do. It happens that quickly. And just, you know, a lot of times with dementia residents, they don't fall forward like you and I do, you know, they just drop. They just drop. They don't do that forward motion. Okay, so so it's a fast decline frontal temporal Parkinson's. So you've got that muscle rigidity and that fall. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And that can also drag out for 15 to 20 years too. And so inevitably what happens is in assisted living, we can care usually up for them for a certain point, but then at some point they may have to go to the nursing home. If I can't keep you from falling, I can't make you safe. You know, I've got to make sure that you're,
What do they do when they take them to the nursing home?
well,
Keep the bed rails up so they can't get out?
yes, bed rails are not allowed in assisted living, just so you know. Bed rails are not allowed on a hospital bed. Plus is they have sensor. We cannot have sensors in the chair to indicate if they're getting up. So if my staff was working, let's say, in the kitchen area, they could come run out if they heard the buzzer go off. We don't have any of that in assisted living.
My sister's in assisted living and they have that stuff.
That's not
They have
allowed.
it in her wheelchair.
No,
She
they,
gets up, I think alarm goes off.
okay, well, but that's not allowed by the state of Maryland, just so you know. They cannot have those sensors. That is, that's considered, honestly, that's considered.
Check it out.
No, but it's
Well,
considered a restraint.
Maybe they don't, because they only bring her to
her room when I'm down there.
Mhm.
And, you know, her and I watch TV together, so I'm there and they.
Sure, you know, it's there, and that's fine. And I go, what you do in those situations is position the person close to a nursing desk or somewhere where the caregivers can keep a visual on them most of the time. It's because there's that tendency, you know, people with dementia don't always remember, hey, that they can't get up and walk. And there's just this natural, okay, I'm gonna get up and go. And, you know, sometimes some of the worst accidents are trying to get out of a wheelchair. They'll get caught in a wheelchair then. And so that's a problem too. Yeah. So, you know, so it should, but assisted living, no, they're very strict on what they consider a restraint. And so we cannot have bed rails, we cannot have alarms. We can definitely not have any kind of tie or belt. The only time you can have a belt is if you're literally walking with that resident and you're trying to keep them from falling. So, but that's the only time, you know, otherwise it's considered a restraint. And they're very serious because then that constitutes a, you know, it's basically abuse, physical abuse then at that point. That's how it's defined in there.
What about skilled nursing?
Skilled nursing is a different animal, that's a different animal, yeah. And skilled nursing will use a restraint, but they'll have a physician note with it and everything. It's just none of that is allowed in AL, okay?
My mother had that. When she was in heart, had open heart surgery, she had alarms on it.
Yeah, so anyway, any other questions? And then the other one is Lewy body. And Lewy body, just like frontal temporal, the behavior is bad. Lewy body is bad too, okay? Lewy body is where they are so frightened and so paranoid that they can't even look at themselves in the mirror. That seeing your reflection, a lot of times people with Lewy body, we used to have to cover the mirror because it would frighten them to look at themselves in the mirror. They'll have delusions and hallucinations. And these hallucinations, a lot of times they're afraid somebody's going to kill them or rape them, murder them. You know, not in my facility, but in a sister facility, a gentleman with Lewy body it was getting night, and night is much worse. Why? Because it's darker. Okay, and so he still able to see his reflection in the window, took a chair and crashed through the window because he thought it was somebody coming after him. So, you know, Lewy body is what Robin Williams had, okay, or that was his diagnosis. I did a presentation a few weeks ago, and a woman, oh gosh, her husband had Lewy body and Parkinson's. And my response is, that's about as bad as it gets, okay, because those are two really bad ones. And, you know, right now he was still at home, and I said, you need to be very careful. Does he know who you are? Well, yeah, most of the time. And I go, but when he doesn't know who you are, he's going to see you as a stranger. You need to be careful. You need to be very careful because I don't want him to hurt you. My neighbor, her dad has Lewy bodies as well, and he had a bat by his bed, and they moved him to an assisted living facility, but at home had a bat by his bed and would destroy the lamps, the nightstand, because he thought it was they were inanimate objects, but it was delusions and hallucinations, and so he thought it was other things. Okay, so thank God he didn't really attack his wife, so that's a good thing. Lewy body is a very, very sad. They don't sleep at night either. You know, these are the people that kind of just walk around and wander around. So guess what we did? Make sure that their room had a lot of light, and those hallways where they lived in have a lot of light. Okay, because we just wanted to make them feel about as secure as they can. Those people as well will be on antipsychotics. Okay, any questions? Am I going too fast on this?
What about if they keep talking about people that you have no idea who they're talking about?
Yeah, I know.
Like the people.
But what form would that look?
If the people have no idea who they're talking about, that could be any of them. You have to give me a little bit more besides that.
Well, no, I mean, it'll be like, you know, the people.
The outside.
You know, the people came yesterday.
They came yesterday. Or did you see the people outside?
Yeah, did you see those people?
Oh, wait, the people outside, and that was delusion, hallucination,
Yeah.
kind of thing. It could be a little bit of Lewy body. It could be. Usually early onset. How old is the person?
70.
Okay, that could be early onset Alzheimer's too. And that might be that early on. That would probably be my guess. You know, remember the actor Bruce Willis?
Mhm.
You know, and they, you know, surreptitiously, they didn't say too much about what was afflicting him. They said aphasia. Okay, remember that was the term?
Yeah.
Just so you know, remember we were talking about frontal temporal?
Mhm.
Another descriptive of frontal temporal is primary progressive aphasia. Okay, so he's got, I'm guessing, the language speech of the, of frontal temporal.
It's fairly.
But I go, it was innocuous on purpose, the aphasia, but I'm guessing that that's probably, he either had early onset Alzheimer's or he has primary progressive aphasia. Okay.
Are most of these body chemically induced, or is this possibly a flow to the brain, or?
No, it could be, no. It's not, you have drug-induced dementia, you've got alcohol-induced dementia, those are part of those 100. The sports injury dementia, these are what are the most common that I see in I saw in my building, okay? Those were like the 5 or 6. We did have one that was alcohol-induced, drug-induced. Honestly, they make it even more complicated because once you have the alcohol and the drug, the medications that you would normally give to treat, let's say, the primary dementia diagnosis don't work, or they don't work as well. They tend to be very angry then too. Into alcohol and drug, they have that anger, that subliminal, that underlying anger, not subliminal, but underlying anger. And it makes it a little bit more complicated to deal with. So what I want to communicate to you is dementia isn't, oh, grandma just repeats herself or has a little bit of memory problem. It's far more complicated than that, okay? And the behaviors are significant. And families, you know, need to seek help, okay, when it happens.
That's why we're all here.
Yeah, okay, and next one. You know, we're gonna talk about communication with dementia. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on this, but, you know, when I'm working with caregivers, and even if you're dealing with a loved one, always try to be upbeat, positive, smile. They tend to respond to nonverbal cues more than verbal. Why is that? Well, that's because they're losing their language ability. So, you know, you need to be open. You need to have a smile on your face. You need to be talking slowly, establish eye contact to make sure that they're listening to what you're saying. So establishing eye contact, being open, friendly, a smile, facial expressions, gestures, touch. You know, what we try to do is rub a resident, you know, on their shoulder, try to establish a little bit of comfort, you know, because you know what, this is what I didn't want to see with my caregivers. Oh, you know, here it's time for dinner, and grab the arm and drag them. It's like, well, would you like that? You know, do you really, really think somebody's going to cooperate with you? Well, you know, I just want them to get here because their dinner's ready. It's like, dinner will wait. Dinner will wait. You cannot push or rush a person with dementia. If you do, all you're going to do is drive yourself crazy. The tone and volume make a big difference too, guys. You know, I had caregivers, and believe me, caregivers from other countries, sometimes they have a much more reverence for the elderly that is missing in the United States. I'm not saying it's bad here in terms of you were born and bred and you're a caregiver here, but I noticed that there is a much more reverence and respect. In any case, with West Africa, some of these countries, they speak loudly, you know, that's just the nature of their culture. And I said, you know, tone and volume are very important to a person with dementia. Again, they don't understand the language, but they will understand tone and volume. So please watch it, make sure that you're open, receptive, make your conversation yes or no. Remember I talked about it, simple language, and speak slowly. But just be prepared to be patient, you know, with a person with dementia, because that's the nature of what it is. You know, you don't argue with a person. If they think it's 1941, I'm going to be skipping around on this one. It's called joining their journey. Don't argue with a person, you know, because you're not going to win the argument. If they think it's 1941, let it be 1941, unless they're afraid they're about to be bombed at Pearl Harbor. It doesn't do any harm. You know, I can get you guys this too,
Okay.
and he can, and David can produce it, the hard copies if you want. But you know, you're not gonna win an argument with a dementia resident, okay? It's an irrational disease, so don't apply logic because you aren't gonna prevail. Don't give orders or talk down to the person. Sometimes I see this and it's really a kind of heartbreaking. Just because a person doesn't have dementia doesn't mean that they don't understand what you're saying. And, you know, you've got to be careful about talking while they're present, talking about them, because they're so capable of understanding and you don't know the level of which you know, there is something to be said for respect for the dignity of the person. So, and, you know, what would drive me crazy sometimes though is families that would come in and they would say, oh my gosh, I just sold mom's house. You know, it was the house that she lived in for 60 years. I should tell her. No, you shouldn't tell her, okay? No, she doesn't need to. Well, but I've never lied to my parents, never, oh, please. Okay, I've never lied to my parents, okay? It just is, you know, it's important, you know, you know, she would want to know, I would want to know, she wants to know. All you're going to do is kind of create confusion, upset, you know, the resident, and I'll give you an example. Two sons, they were well-meaning. One insisted on telling their mom that their dad had died. Okay, and she was in my facility. And guess what? For months, she grieved. She would not get out of bed. We tried everything, you know, it was very hard. It's like she had given up. She couldn't explain why, but it was this underlying feeling of loss and grief. And that's what's true for dementia resident. They cannot remember the specifics, but they remember the feeling. And that's what's really, really sad. Okay, what's really sad. So anyway, it does, you know, it does make a difference. You don't have to be totally honest with that resident, okay? Especially if you know it's going to upset them. You know, I had a daughter, she brought her dad across country, he was living in California, and his wife died. And every day he would ask us, where's my wife? And we went round and round, the geriatric psychiatrist and us with the daughter. The daughter wanted us to tell him she died. And what would that precipitate? He wouldn't eat dinner, he would be upset, go into his room and cry. So what we said, what we kind of reached a middle of the road agreement was, well, what we're gonna say is, if she asks, where's my wife? You know, we'll just say, I don't know, you know women, they're shopping, she's probably went to go have her hair done. You know, that's this therapeutic fibbing, because it's a therapy that you're using to make that resident comfortable and not anxious. So it's okay to lie. You're not violating a commandment, because if it's helping that resident to cope, it's a good thing. And so anyway, so we told, you know, when he would say, where's my wife? But if he would specifically ask us, is she dead? Then we agreed to say yes, okay? And then just kind of move on and redirect him to something else. So that was the compromise. But in truth, we prefer not to say that kind of thing, because if you know it's going to upset them, just let it go, okay? Let them have their peace. So we talked about joining the journey in their time and place. If they think, you know, I had a resident who said out front, we had a cafe bar area, and every day she would sit out there waiting for her parents. Her name, she was Norma, and she was from Chicago. But her parents, she was raised in New York City, so she was waiting for her parents to come get her. She was 83 years old. So should I tell Norma, oh yeah, by the way, this isn't New York City, you're Washington, D.C., you're not even in Chicago where you lived most of your life. And by the way, your parents died 40 years ago. No, you let her wait and just say, you know what, when your parents come, why don't we go get something to eat, because your parents are coming and we'll come and get you, okay? Or your parents called to say, hey, they're running late. So that's okay, let's go do an activity. That's called redirection. You're trying to redirect them off the topic. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'm just saying is redirection is kind of a technique that we used to deal with a lot of dementia. Yeah, so you kind of try to change, you know, change their thinking for at least in the short term. Okay, next one. So caring for these caregivers, it is a draining experience. I was very fortunate. I did not have much turnover, but that's because we took care of our caregivers. But it's very important that if you are living with a loved one, that you seek help. That help can be family, friends, church, okay? Memory care support groups. There's Alzheimer's support groups everywhere. And you know what? Actually, in my facility, we were the first one in the state of Maryland to do a support group for frontal temporal. And that actually became the most popular because you had people from not just the DC area, but from Baltimore coming. And because that's that age group where they're in their 40s and 50s. It's different. So, you know, try to get a support group that matches what your loved one has. Because the problems and concerns that somebody, let's say with frontal temporal, is a lot different than an Alzheimer's. I'll give you an example. Frontal temporal, there are people with, what do I do with my children? You know, my husband's here and my kids are graduating from high school and they would come in their cap and gown into a facility, you know, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's different kinds of issues. And not that they're all not beneficial to a degree, but if you can match it, you know, with like a Parkinson's support group is going to be a lot different than somebody with Alzheimer's. Okay, so try to make sure that you're going to the support groups that are going to help you the most. You need to see your own physician, you know, and explain what's going on. And if you need medication, get on medication. That's what it's there for. Okay, at least in the short term. Seek mental health professionals. I had a number of residents that their spouses, we recommended, they're called case managers, but they're case managers / social workers. And they would counsel these people, you know, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, you know, because maybe some of these people didn't feel comfortable going to a support group. And sometimes they don't, and you know, groups aren't their thing. So we would try and make other recommendations. Always try to maintain good diet and exercise. Diet, go low on sugar, go low on carbs, go low on meat. Those are my 3 food groups, so that doesn't work for me. Okay, so that doesn't work for me. Exercise, that's what I try to do. And those of you that know me, I'm walking quite a bit. Anybody who works at Carroll Lutheran is walking quite a bit. You know, get enough sleep. People don't get enough sleep, and that gives actually your brain a chance to kind of regenerate. So think of it that way, is you're allowing your neurons, you know, a break, and they will regenerate at that point. Socialization, don't underestimate that. You've got to maintain, not only does a dementia resident become isolated, you as the caregiver become isolated. So you need to continue to do what you have done in the past. I was telling you about my neighbor. His wife just started, my neighbor's parents. The wife, he's in his facilities now, and guess what? She's going back to doing bridge, going back to her book club, which is what she needs to do. You need to continue with that life and do whatever stress reduction, you know, techniques you can do, whether it's breathing, yoga, meditation, whatever you want to do, Bible reading, all of the above. Just do all of the above and take a break. What I mean is take respite care. And that's the final one, David, if you want to switch. What do I mean by respite care? A lot of facilities, and even our assisted living facility, will take people for a week or 2, or maybe even up to a month, to give, let's say you're a caregiver and you said, I've reached my limit, I need a break. And we can take care of your loved one for a few weeks, up to a month, even 2 months, okay, is what it comes down to, because we can renew that 30-day requirement. So anyway, not requirement, the 30-day recommended strategy. So if you need a break, or let's say your grandkids are graduating from college or getting married, you want to be able to go, but you cannot go because you cannot leave that loved one alone. Arrange for respite care. Either bring in a nurse aid agency, you know, and who am I talking about? Right at home, you know, some of those kinds of groups, home instead, and they can stay, or, you know, with your loved one while you're gone, or like I said, facilities, including Carroll Lutheran, do allow you to bring in for respite care. Adult day programs. Now, I don't know what's available here in Carroll. I know in Frederick County that there are 2 adult daycare centers.
At least one.
What?
There's one right in Westminster.
Okay, and that's what you do, and because a lot of times adult days will specialize in dementia care. And that gives families the break they need, maybe a couple of days a week. Adult day usually lasts several hours, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours a day. A lot of times they have a bus that will actually come and pick up your loved one back. Adult daycare is great because it gives you, meaning the caregiver, a break. And it allows that rest to socialize on a different level. And you know what, it sounds weird, but people with dementia, they can communicate in ways that you and I don't quite understand. And you know, it's very interesting. So they have their own, and they develop their own group. It's comforting. It's very comforting to watch that. Private duty aides, I just talked about that. You can bring them in the home for, 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, something along those lines. Again, to allow you time to decompress and then also to do your errands. Hospice care, that's at end of life. That shouldn't be there first. The hospice care is only when your person is at end-stage dementia. Memory care communities is what I was talking to you about, and that's what I ran, was a memory care community. Sometimes they're a standalone, like my building was a standalone. Sometimes they're part of an assisted living. It's maybe one wing. So sometimes it's the whole building, sometimes it's a wing in the building or a certain floor. And so you may need to consider those. Are they cheap? No, they're not cheap. They're probably somewhere in the neighborhood, well, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about $7,000 a month. But if you think about it, private duty aid care is about $27, $28 an hour. Well, depending on which agency, I'm being generous here. But yeah, they can go as high as $30 an hour. So, so you may want to scope that out as well. So anytime that you have questions like that, just call us, meaning Carroll Lutheran. It doesn't matter whether or not we're in service to the community. So if you need help in terms of resources, we're going to give you the information to the best of our ability, because, we would advise people where I worked before, yeah, you're too early to be here. You may want to try adult day first, and they had multiple adult days in Friends Club, Kensington Club. They had one in Silver Spring. So, they had multiple adult daycare centers. In Carroll, it may not be as many. I know that they've got 2 in Frederick County. So, but adult day, I can't say enough good things if it's done well, because I think it's really good. But what it's going to have to be is maybe a combination of a lot of different things. Maybe private duty for a few hours every week. Maybe adult day for 2 to 3 days a week. Maybe a respite once a year for 2 to 4 weeks. So try thinking that these aren't to be done in solitary, but all together. Okay, that's a quick rundown. Okay, and you guys, yeah. So do you have any questions or anything like that about? Yeah.
Yeah, so